I'm Adrienne Giffen, and this is Now You're Talking. Parenting in the digital world can feel overwhelming, especially when you're balancing a career, raising teens and preteens, and trying to keep up with it all. Screens are constant, and sometimes real connection feels out of reach. This podcast is your chance to pause and breathe, a space for stories and insights that bring encouragement, perspective, and the reminder that you are not alone. In this episode of Now You're Talking, we dive into what it really means to grow up and raise kids in today's complex world. My guest, Will Dobud, co-creator of Kids These Days, brings a grounded, compassionate lens to the challenges families and educators face around mental health, social media, and youth engagement. We explore how labels can limit or liberate, why outdoor and experiential learning matter more than ever, and how curiosity and conversation can bridge the growing gaps between generations. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, or anyone who cares about the next generation, this conversation will invite you to rethink what kids truly need to thrive. Let the conversations begin. So, Will, thank you for joining me today. I'm so interested to hear about your journey writing your book and as a parent and just your thoughts around kids these days.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, we've written a book called Kids These Days, myself and Professor Nevin Harper in your neck of the woods and on Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And we got started because Nev and I were actually sitting together at a conference in Norway a few years ago, and we were talking around a fire, and as we are as outdoorsy people, and
yes,
we kind of were just sitting there going, there's more therapists, there's more mental health labels, there's more, medications. There's so much medications that we're finding, like antidepressants in the runoff and fish we eat, and nothing seems to be getting better. How are we missing the mark on this? And so that is really what started our journey of, well, let's talk to experts about this. And Nevin started having Zooms with people, the experts we interviewed throughout the book. And when we listened to that, I actually, behind me in my little office here, I put up like little quotes that they'd say in the interviews and labeled them up. I looked like the Unabomber, like putting all the ties together and finding these things. And I went, actually, when you really zoom out, there's so much going on here that is much more complicated than one single variable, single factor, easy solution. That was sort of what built the book and made it a real challenge, was how to have a coherent narrative with too many ideas.
So where did you start? What did your line of sticky notes tell you?
Well, the funny part, we were talking about the title before we hit record. And so Nevin just said, he created a Dropbox folder and just called it Kids These Days. And I thought, that's a funny working title. We'll stick with that. And then when we got closer to having a draft, because I think we'll talk about this, that each chapter kind of could be its own book because there's so many ideas. And Nevin had this title, Kids These Days. And I said, I'd like to write the first chapter because we both have a lot of things in common. Psychotherapy and mental health research that's been the domain that I've lived in as an academic. So I really wanted to talk about how is it possible that there's more therapies, more diagnoses, and we're not getting it.
Yes,
and
more labels,
all of that. And so I started writing chapter 1, and I just started searching and going as far back as I could to how long have adults complained about the kids of the day. And there's a famous caricature of Socrates going, kids are lazy and out of shape. And that's like 400 to 500 BC. We're talking centuries before Christ. And so I was like, this is a long time. And so one of the interesting things we found, and there's a study we wrote about in chapter 1 that they surveyed adults, that the more intelligent adults perceive of themselves, the more likely they are to say the kids don't read and they're dumb and this. And then the more kind of conservative in the sense of, I don't think it's politically, but kids need to respect their forefathers. They need to be, they need to be more respectful and caring and say thank you and your pleases and thank yous, the more likely you're going to say the kids have bad manners. So there's evidence around where this stuff sort of comes from. Now, the part that was alarming to us was what happens when you actually start labeling and medicating and intervening and interfering. Yes. Instead of it being a jokey up kids these days, we're actually outsourcing a lot of these labels where if the kid, the school ends up being the laboratory where that's where if the kid doesn't fit in, if they don't go to school, well, there's antidepressants and we can get them out of bed. If they can't sit still in school, there's stimulants. And so we're seeing this rise of more and more medication, and the rates of mental illness are either going up or down depending on who's counting, but they're not, it doesn't seem like to me that this is a viable solution in the long run if we're going to continue creating more labels, creating more medications, and continuing this kids these days fiction.
And I think what I see is kids are labeling one another. So they're internalizing it. And I think you talked about that in your book, is that the kids are internalizing these labels. And how do kids move through that if we continue to do that to them and then they do it to themselves?
This is one of when we talked about like adolescence being this, it's an adventure and identity. You're figuring out who you are. That's why you pierce your eyebrow or go get a sneaky tattoo. You're trying to find these ways to be, to know who you are. Simultaneously, your brain is going through this huge pruning process, and that's like emptying the recycle bin on your computer. It's getting rid of inconsequential information. At the same time, some things go, like your ability to speak clearly and things that are important that will come back. And simultaneously, what we've seen in this sort of, like we call this like planet mental health, like we're talking about mental health more and more than ever. And what we found was, if somebody gets, like living through COVID, like we all got COVID, no one walked around and said, I am COVID. And with the mental health labels, we say, I am this thing. And I'm in Adelaide, South Australia at the moment. That is like, I'm about 5-10 minutes up the road from what's called the Dulwich Center. This is where narrative therapy was kind of born. And I am not a narrative therapist by any means, but narrative therapy has these wonderful ideas about how to not internalize problems, that the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. So we want young people internalizing strengths, resources. I am a good person. I can contribute, instead of I am this deficit-focused, pathologized label. I am attention deficit. And that feels in some ways as inherently limiting. But the hard part is the entire Western world's mental health care system is set up around diagnosis. And what we know is a diagnosis does not correlate to a better outcome. It predicts virtually nothing.
Okay. Well, so how does the digital era contribute to like self-diagnosis or labeling? And I know you say that history is repeating itself, and I agree with that. But then there's this additional level of complexity that we're all managing.
Yeah. So social media has a big role to play in the huge increase, the huge spike. And a lot of that, there's algorithms, I see things all the time, 5 signs you're ADHD, and then also TikTok and reels that are, getting tons and tons of views that are all about mental health identities. And so that becomes, and we've gone into this. I think social media has a big part of this. I also think you could argue 24-hour news has not helped either. And as someone who grew up in Washington, D.C., I sit down at a dinner table, everybody puts their phones down, and then they go, is that a red person or a blue person? Are you an ally or are you not an ally? And they simplify these complex things as if a right-leaning, red-voting person from West Virginia is the same as someone from Alaska, is the same as someone who lives in Washington, D.C. So we wrote about how we're getting, as the world gets more complicated, humans want to find tribes that we belong to. And at the same time, what's happening is we're starting to categorize and classify people into things that might not be that helpful. And at a big zoomed out picture, as you've read the book and seen some of the political undertones of it, if we really want to preserve a good democracy, we have to stop label calling and all of these things. We're seeing this, it's turning in. So social media has a big part to this, where if a young person even Googles about their mental health, their social media feed will then start feeding them information about this. So it's quite scary.
It is. So what about the family tribe? What is happening to the family tribe in these days?
So that's one of the hard parts is many of us, we bring work home. Kids bring bullies home. They also bring 6 billion strangers into your home through the phones. We're bringing all of this in, And so what happens with the phone is that we're not connecting at the dinner table. Like, we cite research that, families that have dinner together, like, I think it's like 3 times a week, you're reducing the likelihood of your child to engage in risk-taking, like negative risk-taking behaviors, illicit substance use, these sort of things. So right there, you're creating in the home a lighthouse, but we still have to have that kind of human-to-human connection to do that. Now, that doesn't mean just prohibiting all technology or games or anything like that, but we still need to know that we have time where young people can see us as a human. I remember, and everybody, I think that went to elementary or primary school knows this, that there's a random time in many kids' lives where you see your English teacher in a grocery store and you go, what? That's a real person? They leave school? How is this? What are they doing out here? This is bizarre. But we don't want that to be so alarming. We want to be the real person in a young person's life. That's the goal. So I think in many ways, if we can give young people something to imitate, we'll be less alarmed by kids these days, because we'll have shown them how to engage at the dinner table. We wrote about this in that identity chapter about how I grew up. My oldest friend, like, we were babies months apart. Our parents were friends. They moved from Washington, D.C. out to rural Maryland. And so his father, Vietnam vet, we would go out there from like 5 years old and we would shoot guns. Now, me, with my Washington, D.C. upbringing, this terrified my mother. This was not like, we were not pro-gun or anything. And my friend ended up joining the army. He went to Iraq, did 2 tours in Iraq. When he left, he came and stayed with us in Australia. And my partner, Renee, and him, they got into it about America and guns at the dinner table with the kids. The kids still talk about that over 10 years later. They say that was the most alive conversation about 2 people disagreeing and arguing, but then going, okay, I guess we'll go watch a movie now. And so I think just dialogue, debate, democracy, being together, giving kids a world to participate in. If the only way to participate is through tiny screens, we're going to miss the mark and we're going to stay divided, and not only divided culturally, but by age, that the kids these days, adults these days. So we want to be together. There's a great saying from a poem, and I don't remember. One of my social work students shared with me that kids don't belong to you. They belong to tomorrow. So are we setting them up for tomorrow? Or are we just managing that? Why are the kids a nuisance?
Right. So, that's so interesting. So there is a lot of onus on us as parents, a lot of responsibility as parents. And yet we're pulled in so many directions, because really this has been around for 15 years, but we've all sort of been learning as we go. And so we're all still figuring it out.
Yeah.
So could you explain your perspective? Because there's a lot of movement towards getting phones out of schools. Can you share a little bit about what you shared in your book, about why that works or why it doesn't?
Sure. So inherently, that feels right. It makes sense. It'll make teachers' lives easier, ideally, as long as they don't have to have another thing that they have to police. One of the things about sensationalizing this movement is it ends up becoming this will eventually solve this problem. And so my concern with it, and this comes from my training as a therapist. So we'll play a little thought experiment here. So sometimes a young person comes to see me, or a parent comes and they sit across from me and they'll say, let's talk from the parent's point of view. My child and I, we fight all the time. We hear this big problem saturated story. They're sneaking out. They're doing drugs. I can't get them to come home on time. I can't do anything. And then I might ask this question, and I might say, I want you to suppose that coming here today, you wake up tomorrow morning and the problem that brought you here is gone, but you don't know that yet. What's going to be the first thing you notice? And what most people do is they say, my kid won't yell at me anymore. And I go, but instead of yelling, what is he going to notice about you? And so let's say we remove the phones. What's going to be the first way we're going to interact with kids? So looking towards this miracle future can give us clues right away. And the thing is, it's when you get in a taxi, like you get back from the airport, you pick up your bags from the baggage carousel, you walk outside, you get in the taxi driver looks at you and says, where do you want to go? And then imagine if you just said, anywhere but here. I want to be anywhere but social media. I want to be anywhere but...
analogy.
So I go, okay, let's say you get in the taxi and we have phone-free schools. How will you interact with young people once the phones are gone?
Yes.
And the answer to that is the way we should be interacting with them already.
Anyway, yes.
Anyway.
Yeah.
It's not just the phones.
Yeah.
And so we can, if you start thinking about, the where to approach, where are we going? That it's we don't need to just harp on the problems. We can harp on what are we trying to get to.
Yeah.
We didn't really write about this, but one of the people that inspired me, Insoo Kimberg, she's no longer alive, but she was one of the developers of solution-focused therapy. And before she passed away, she did this project, I believe in a New York City school. It was called Working on What Works, WOWW. And she sat in the back of a classroom. And for the first 4 weeks of the semester, she would take notes of what works. And she'd go up to kids and go, I really noticed you're interested in this content. That's pretty neat. What is that? And then she'd sit there. And then after that, she'd present to the students and to the teacher in that classroom what she thinks is working. And then the students and the teacher develop some sort of contract about how are we going to make sure that we do more of what works together, not just waiting around for something to work. So we argued one of the things with phone-free schools or social media bans is that we don't want to treat youth as too passive in this. And so that's a passive intervention, similar to medicating. We can medicate and then what? We can diagnose and then what? Where are we actually moving towards? I found to be a much more useful and more pragmatic and a much more progressive viewpoint of this.
Bring the young people into the solution. Together create a vision for what works.
Yeah.
They're brilliant. That's what they're so insightful. That's what I see. When we allow them the opportunity to actually speak and share, it's incredible how a lot of young people see the world. Most young people.
Well, you want a scary statistic that I will make up, but I'll just make it up because I don't have it on the top of my head. One of the big movements in the early 1900s was to get kids out of factories, right? And so it wasn't like this ethical, moral dilemma. It was, this is not good for youth development. It's not good to stunt the spirit of adventure, play, Jane Addams, the founder of, the mother of professional social work, my profession, she wrote in 1909 about a free-ranging childhood. So none of this stuff is new, No, But she argued for, you get kids out of the factory so that they can play and they can have intergenerational play and be with other people, not just working. When they surveyed kids who worked at these dangerous, unhealthy factories, it was something like 80% said they'd prefer to stay in the factory than go to school. Yeah.
Really? Because why? That was their safety?
I think that school wasn't engaging. It wasn't inspiring to them. And so we need to think about the classroom as the place for young people to participate. So I know every therapist on planet Earth says this, but I've never asked a teenager to put their phone down.
Really? Okay. Well, tell me more about that.
Well, I think a young person walks in and it has to be exciting. Like, I mean, school's boring. I get that. But I think that there is this, if we're giving them something to do and something to contribute and participate in, I think they'll do it. I think most kids will do it. So I think the phone is very enticing and it has great algorithms to keep you hooked and the forever scroll and all of these things to keep you hooked. But that's where the adult comes in and goes, let's go do something.
So it goes back to that responsibility to engage.
Yeah, I think so.
The young person. So tell me, in your book, again, you talk about outdoor learning. And I guess you just said spirit of adventure. Can you share a little bit about that and how you see that really contributes to a young person's growth and development?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm under no illusion that the outdoors is somehow better than any other place. It's just, I grew up going to summer camp 8 weeks a year from about 8 years old. And when I learned that you could work as a therapist outdoors, I went, oh, that makes sense to me. One of the things, Nevin, my co-author, he's been on the board for Outward Bound Canada. He's a researcher for Outward Bound Canada.
Yep. So
Outward Bound informed a lot of our work. And one of the things with the outdoors is when you put a young person outside, they have something, there's this inherent belief that you've got to do something. Like you've got to set up a tent, you've got to make a fire, you've got to do all of these things. And what we're seeing in therapy is more young people go to therapy than ever, but still the most common number of sessions that anyone goes to is one. So they're there and then they go, not for me. And so
that's interesting. So
the outdoors was a way to think about how do we give kids experiences that could be resiliency promoting. Now, the outdoors can also scare the hell out of you. You get bit by a snake or a bear in your neck of the woods. We got sharks and everything here in South Australia. But the outdoors can be a great place to do a different style of learning. Going back to the early 1900s, we got the kids out of the factory and then we got them more and more into school. And at the same time, education philosophers like John Dewey were thinking about experiential learning from reflecting on experience. So like every outdoor ed program in the world is inspired by these ideas from the early 1900s, which is stop thinking of education as only passive, learning from a lecture, learning from a book, because people still learn from every time they think about the experience. So the outdoors could be a whole nother way to inspire young people, to give them experiences of being outside where they can really contribute in something. So I don't think it only has to be the outdoors. What John Dewey and Jane Addams, what they were saying was the best classroom should mimic the best democracy. Everybody has a vote. Everyone has something to contribute. Everybody has something to participate in. And so sometimes, and this is not a go at teachers, because we argue teachers, rocket scientists need a teacher. So they're the most important job in the world. One of the things, sometimes education can be a bit too passive. And so we kind of argue that what we've learned from the outdoors is that young people are active in making meaning from what they participate in. And when they're active and we are clued into them being active, we end up building a stronger connection because they know they can tell us what meaning they're making. So for example, when we do, and I'm not trying to be self-serving about outdoor therapy here, but let's say a young person is at a high ropes course and there's a big zip line and they have to jump off something that's 10 meters off the ground. And they say, no. What a great opportunity to say, what was it like to tell the adult that you didn't want to do something? Oh,
right.
Okay. Instead of, no, trust me, you have to do this thing, push yourself. Instead, be really curious about what's the possibility here? The possibility is anything that we look for.
Yeah. So it's shifting our mindset, isn't it, as adults?
Yeah.
You said something, Will, that intrigued me. You said something about an experience continues to teach you. Can you share that a little bit? So stuff that we do when we're children or young people, teenagers, still continues.
Okay.
Can you?
Yes. So tell me to shut up if we get too philosophical here.
Okay.
When
I'll give you a couple of more minutes.
Okay. So experience is a fascinating thing. And I think when it comes to the therapy world, we just have an engagement problem because we don't really know what people experience. So all of us, we say things like, our students are my best teacher, and then you go, what'd they teach you? When did you ask them for the feedback? And you often can't find it. You go, where's the list of all the things you've learned, right? And that's it. So getting feedback is really hard. Now, the one thing is with experience, every experience connects to the next thing. So there's no end to an experience. We only are a human experience. So you could, this is another John Deweyism, you could wake up in the middle of the night, there's a loud bang, and you go, oh my gosh, there's a burglar in my home. And now you're heightened, you're anxious, maybe you grab a hockey stick, maybe you're going, what the heck is this? And you find out your cat knocked a lamp over. So you were really scared and nervous. That was real. And now you're laughing about it and going, I was in my underwear walking around with a hockey stick. Isn't that funny? So they're all connected. It just keeps going and going and going. So it builds. So young people end up, we don't want to treat human-to-human interaction as incidental or too mechanical. So in the therapy world, we have this we have to do an assessment. This is why people don't go back after one session. They go, here I am. Are you going to help me? And they say, tell me about your mother. And you go, aren't I here because I'm a naughty kid in the classroom? And this is if for the people interested in therapy stuff, there's a great book called The First Kiss by Daryl Chow. It's about first sessions in therapy. And one of the things when I'm talking to the therapist is I say, we really have to think about our first session and what young people are experiencing, because quite often, if their parents have dragged them by the ear to therapy, or they're court ordered, or the school says you have to go see the school counselor, they feel like a loser. What's being communicated is you're not pulling up your end of the bargain and you need to be fixed. And then imagine going to a restaurant and walking into the restaurant and the head of house says, what can I get you? And you say, I'd like a table for one or a table for two. And they say, why? And you say, well, I'd like a meal. And they go, how long have you been hungry? What's the intensity of this hunger? We don't get to the point. We do this long-winded assessment and then we go, come back next week and I'll feed you. Right? So it's this huge engagement problem with young people. And so if we're not giving them something to engage and participate in, no wonder the phone has such a stranglehold on things. So it's fascinating. So experience, it all ties together, And the reason we all freak out when we get older and we go, oh my gosh, I'm becoming my mother, is because who do we have to imitate? Yeah.
That's very true. Knowing what you know now, and what would you, and you're going through this whole journey, parenthood, your experience with your students, knowing what you know now, what would you do the same and what would you do differently?
The same, in our house, I grew up in a family that did not eat together. Nobody ate anything together. I just got home from school. I had a very successful mother and a blue-collar father, so I got picked up from school at 6 p.m., maybe McDonald's, maybe a TV dinner, nothing good. And when I met my partner, Renee, and with the kids in our house, we had dinner all the time, every day, all the time. And she's an incredible cook. I learned how to cook. I didn't have a salad till I was 19 years old. So our kids, I remember one day Lucas got home from school and he reaches in the fridge and pulls out pickled octopus. And I was like, what are you doing? A 5-year-old eating pickled octopus. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I think I learned so much about eating and things like that. What I would do differently, it's hard to say because our kids are wonderful. I would say I'd probably make an effort to play one-on-one with each of them a bit more often.
Okay. Well, thank you. So what I would like to do is transition Will into asking you some questions about from the Now You're Talking board game. And I created this because a lot of what we're talking about, we've lost the art of conversation. And this is a simple, fun way to get it back. And it's an actual board game where you go down with adversity and up with growth and change. So it's sort of combining snakes and ladders with the game of life.
Cool.
Really. So I would like to just ask you, let me just see, what's a small decision that has had a very big impact?
Well, I would say one of the smallest, most amazing things that happened in my life was, and it's not a small decision in this grand scheme of things, but my mother, she is a breast cancer survivor. And when she finished breast cancer treatment, she said, "That's it. I'm sorry if you lose all your whatever inheritance there is, but we're traveling." So 22, she took us to Alaska, my brother and I, in 2009. We went on a little cruise in Alaska, and I do not get seasick. Never have, probably because I grew up on canoes in the outdoors, I don't know. And it was really rough, off the coast of Alaska. Everybody was sick, and I went to the bar, and that's where I met my wife.
My goodness,
Yeah.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Boy. Oh, well, thank goodness for it's seasick.
Yep, we just sat there.
That's fantastic. What is something that you admire in others that you want more of in yourself?
I think one of the things that I admire the most in when I meet new people and when I get to talk to anybody, I just love when people are so passionate about something. Like my PhD supervisor was a cult researcher. Fascinating. Like I don't think about it. Writing a chapter about environmental toxins, talking to Dr. Bruce Lanphier, fascinating.
Yes.
I was like,
yeah,
this guy's incredible. And so I try to think, I think of like, I see people and I go, I'm going to imitate that. I want to steal that. And it's usually when it's something they're really passionate in, because you can make anything infectious. I think you can make anything interesting by being passionate about it. And I think that's where I see people that are really passionate and then driven to go do something. So I think that is sort of maybe one of the qualities I try to, because I can be very distractible, and I can be, forget chores to do and important things that make living with me very annoying. But I think that having that discipline related to your passion, I just find to be remarkable, because a lot of times we don't see the outcome of the hard work we've put in right away, and it can feel demoralizing. But the truth is, someone asked me this about the book, I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter sales numbers, because at least we got to write it. Like, I have a job where I got to write it. That's unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. And when passion is born out of purpose, then it's just so infectious, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, thanks. Just a couple more questions.
Sure. Keep them coming.
And then it really is amazing to play this game with different generations. Yeah. And for young people to hear from their grandparents. So we played with 4 generations, and my kids were amazed. And then, but you put the grandchildren in with their great grandmother. And what I've noticed is kids, when we are able as parents to sit in silence while the kids try to figure out their answer, they come up with way more brilliant answers than we do when we try to rescue them. So it's a fascinating study of human behavior just playing this game.
Yeah. I love it. There's actually, I was interviewed on the ABC, the Australian radio, the other day, and the host was talking about, we were talking about phones and connection, and the host said, "Will, do you remember in 2020 that study that happened in Australia where they took young people who were really struggling with the lockdowns and being at home, and they just paired them with, like, not the next generation, the generation up, and then they're learning stories about what was it like when Japanese subs came into the Sydney harbor during World War II. And like, now they're talking about, like, you've got this really impactful experience of going through a pandemic, and then the older populations have been through so many other things. So we often and we write this in the book, that it's really tempting to only live in the time that we're in, right?
Yes.
Which is like if we want to hear about another time, like in New York City in the 90s, they banned pinball because they thought it was linked to youth crime. So
isn't that interesting?
it took 30 years to reel it back. They threw all like hundreds of pinball machines in the New York Harbor. And it's so funny because the language about the phones, there's headlines. And if you want to laugh, Google pinball ban newspaper clippings. It's like pinball addiction can be cured like alcoholism. Like,
that is fascinating. Yeah. So
we've done all this before.
History repeats over and over. So what would your younger self be most surprised about your life today?
Working at a university.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I hated school. I mean,
you're an academic. That's great.
Well, I hated school. And then I realized when I started learning psychology and social work, I was at a community college. And again, I had this teacher, Dr. Donald Palmer at Montgomery Community College in Maryland. And he walked into the classroom. This was adolescent psychology. He sat on my desk and in front of all the students, he said, "So let me guess, you've enrolled in this class, pretty messed up childhood?" And I just went, "You could say that." And then we just cracked up laughing. And he engaged the classroom. And he did this thing where he said, "You have 7 exams in this class, 7 multiple choice exams, and we'll drop the lowest score. So if you just want to bomb one of them, that's cool. But at the same time," it just fly out of my face, "at the same time, I'm leaving the room. So if you want to be an ethical practitioner, here's your chance." And so we're all undergrad students and we're going, can we cheat? Or is that the wrong thing to do? Or is he allowing us to cheat? What should we do? I didn't see anybody cheat. We were given the standard to be. And when I started reading peer-reviewed literature, I just started meeting people and I went, in academia, we get to write about whatever we want and maybe someone will care. Nobody usually cares. But I grew really passionate going, I had really great teachers. But at the same time, like throughout university, I had great teachers. I had some duds, of course, it's each their own. But there was a bit of, it's amazing to be a part of the journey of people joining your profession. You get to be a voice of the social work profession. And so I think the fact that I'm passionate about education, my younger self would think I'm an idiot.
Well, so what was the name of that professor that had such an impact on you?
Dr. Donald Palmer. If Dr. Donald Palmer, here's another wild how the world works synchronistically. Yeah. I finished my degree. I was probably a Thanksgiving dinner, and my aunt, who is in her 70s now, I would say, she came over for Thanksgiving. She said, "Congratulations on graduating. You studied at Montgomery College for a while. Did you ever meet Donald Palmer?" And I said, "That's the best teacher I've ever had." And she goes, "Really?" She goes, "I was in his first class."
Wow.
Yeah. So
he's even then he made an impact on your aunt.
God. Yeah. She goes, "He's the funniest person in the world." Yeah, I know.
Isn't that correct? So what lessons have you learned from Dr. Palmer that you take forward into your profession and who you are in front of students?
I think that the classroom is my room, and that if somebody is bored in my room, I'm probably being boring. And so I want to keep attention and keep everybody engaged in something. And also, again, with wanting to give someone something to imitate, I don't want to shy away from being challenged because you're showing students what it's like to be challenged. So that's okay. And then I want to pair that with knowing what it is that I want to talk about, really doing the homework on different topics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, what have I learned from Donald Palmer? Another thing Donald Palmer said, and I will never forget this. And I have a friend, we did these classes together. He works in movies in New York City, and he says he's never forgotten it. At the end of each semester, he would say, if you're going to send an email or something, or you're going to write something, just please proofread it. Otherwise, you're going to look like an idiot.
Those are kind words to live by.
And I'm a stinky proofreader, but it was very funny to me. Like those kind of lessons stick with you far beyond whatever I learned about rats in a maze in psychology class.
What are some words of wisdom that you can share with listeners?
So when a parent calls me and they say, Will, I'd like you to help my kid, I often jokingly say, why me? And they say, well, you've written books. You have this funny doctor in front of your name. You've got all these things. And I say, yeah, but you have no idea how effective I am. You know that I can write a book. Everyone can write a book. Most people can. And I say this to them. I say, okay, I'll see your child next week. We booked the appointment, right? And I'll say, but in the next week, us therapy folk, we have this, sometimes we risk being this sort of therapist archaeologist where we go digging around in areas that we don't need to be digging around in. So before we meet, can you make a list of everything you do not want me to change about your child? And so whether or not your kid's going to therapy or not, whether other type of schooling, parents can always do a resource audit for their child. They could sit down and go, here we are today. What do we want to make sure doesn't change? And when we see those things, we'll notice them more often.
What is it like for parents?
It's a bit confronting and it's hard to notice things. So I say you have to do this like Sherlock Holmes. You need to find little clues of what's working because it's easier to make those things bigger than to solve these big problem narratives. So it's been really good. There's a fascinating study where we got this idea from. It's an unpublished master's thesis, something like that, where a therapist in the States in Chicago, when parents rang, they said, the receptionist said, he's so busy he can't see you for 2 weeks. This was all part of the study, right?
Yes.
And they said, okay, we can survive for 2 weeks. And they say, well, during these 2 weeks, can you bring a list of everything that changes in the right direction from now until the session in 2 weeks? So Freud even called this a flight to health. And we do this when we all go to the dentist. We go, crap, I got a dentist appointment. I better floss this week.
I'm flossing,
right? So humans, we do this, right? So they had parents say, can you, over the next 2 weeks before your first session, can you just look at everything that starts changing now? Because this magical thing happens where things start changing when you book your first session. 80% of people canceled their first session.
Really? Wow. So it's just about noticing.
And
noticing what's good, the strengths, rather than focusing on the weaknesses.
And noticing when problems are, this is a harder one, is noticing when problems are absent. So noticing when something's lesser than. Like, when do you all communicate really well?
Yeah. And it's sort of like what you said too, is that creating that vision of solutions and what works. Instead of focusing on what isn't working, taking the faults away. Aaron, we didn't even get into your whole discussion in your book about toxins, and all I can say is I encourage people to read your book.
Thank you.
It's an excellent book with lots of insights that I hadn't seen in the same way. So it's new and it's refreshing.
The way we wrote it, and this was a challenge because we've all lived through the decade of the parenting manual, Tiger Mom, free range parents, all this. It's too much information for parents, and it's too many follow the perfect rules, and then your child will sleep all the time, and then your child doesn't sleep, and you go, am I a bad mother? I tried to follow the rules. What about? And so this is what we tried to do, is write a book about youth mental health for adults. So we don't tell people what to do, but we try to lay out this information so that you can go, what am I going to do now that I see this? Or I disagree with that. Okay. And then just keep, So thinking about and this is where the toxins chapter was it shook us so much. And then we went, oh, I get it now. We can't do everything to stop this problem, but we can try to buy organic the best we can. If we all wanted to be organic all the time, we'd never go out to a restaurant. So you would miss that wonderful experience. So you'd have to interrogate the chef. Where did you buy this? How local is it? It's too much, but there's little things we can do to reduce exposures throughout time.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, I read your book and I felt energized by it, not deflated. And I think as parents, and then here I'm going on.
That's great.
As parents, we label ourselves. And so then I'm a bad mom or, a poor parent or whatever, but we could do that to ourselves. So,
yes.
Well, thank you, Will, for this time. I really appreciate it and so really enjoyed your insight.
Thank you.
What I love about Will's perspective is how human and hopeful it is. Will reminds us that connection doesn't come from fixing. It comes from listening, engaging, and learning together. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who's navigating their own kids these days moments. And remember to subscribe so you don't ever miss a conversation that helps you reconnect with yourself, your family, and the world around you. Until next time, keep the conversations going. And remember, connection starts with curiosity. You've been listening to Now You're Talking. Parenting with a busy career while guiding kids through the lure of screens isn't easy, but meaningful connection is always worth it. Take a moment to start a conversation with someone you care about. It could be the highlight of their day. Until next time, let the conversations begin. Now you're talking.
I'm Michelle Abraham, and we are honored to have Adrienne Giffen's Now You're Talking podcast on our High Vibe Podcast Network. For more high vibe shows like hers, head on over to highvibepodcastnetwork.com and grab your free gift from our gift vault from all of our hosts. Until then, stay high vibe.